You've built, you call it the fractional formula.
Yep.
Um, and I liken it to an operating system because it is literally the system that sits underneath your business and you and all of the things that you can do. It's the machine and the engine underneath, which just keeps running,
Mhm.
that helps somebody build up and sustain a consulting business. So I'd love to step through that with you at a really high level. We won't cover everything because I appreciate that there's a lot of material, but we'll just go through a few key points. The first one I'd love to talk about is understanding your ideal customer profile, which if someone doesn't know what that is, but it's who are the people that I want to work with and why. So can you talk me through why it's important to understand who your ICP is?
Yeah, sure. If you if you look at any if you look at any content at all, business content written by consultants, I would say 90% of it is written by a consultant in their own voice about a topic that they're passionate about. And that's because we're intelligent, experienced people. And so for me as a technology guy, I would write about technical debt, I would write about frameworks, I'd write about transformations. I see it now, but everyone's writing about AI from a
Yeah.
technology perspective. But in my experience, when speaking to potential clients, what I realized really early on was potential clients would come to me, and the things that they were saying to me weren't problems as such. They were the symptoms of the problems as seen by them. And so I had this wake up call of, oh my God, it's like watching an Englishman and a Frenchman speaking to each other in their native tongue. Neither really understands what's being said. I've got a vague idea maybe because of some GCSE French, but I'm not fluent by any stretch. And that's what consultants and clients are doing all of the time by accident without ever realizing it. And so when I think about ideal customer profile, the biggest outcome of that, it's not just about knowing, what industry, what size of organization, what stage of growth, etc. They're the most basic of parameters. It's also about understanding how the customer themselves would position the problem that you understand, because they very rarely articulate it in your terminology. Most most executives that I've ever worked with, that I've ever met, three big headlines: reduce cost, increase revenue, manage risk. And so articulating the symptoms of the problems through those lenses means that if you're able to do that, suddenly you've just become relevant to them.
So
Now,
no one comes to you and says, "Hey, please sort out my technical debt."
never, never in a,
Right.
never. God, I wish in those early days they did, because that was my, when I went to market as a consultant, I was the guy that solved technical debt for scale ups.
Right.
The funny thing is, the only people that ever understood what that actually meant was people just like me. And so if I
The
wrote,
people, the people creating the technical debt,
yeah,
actually. Yeah.
so so I'd write content about technical debt, and I'd get inundated with CTOs, lead engineers, quality people, project people say, "Oh, fantastic piece of content, Dan, really resonated." Not one of them has got a budget or an inkling to hire me. And then I go and talk to CEOs, and they say to me, "I'm just so sick of speaking to our engineers, and every time I speak to them, they say I need three more engineers, and I don't even know what the engineers we've got are actually doing, but everything feels like it's slowing down." And that became my symptom set. I remember the first person that ever said that to me, and all of those sentences came from one person. And I remember listening to it going, I would never have said that. Though
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
wouldn't have been part of my narrative. What I realized was the moment I lent into that narrative and I started talking to people in their own language, in their at their own point of understanding, pain rather than problem, suddenly those same people started to feel like they'd been heard and they'd been understood, and that just maybe Dan might be somebody that can help move us down the line. And
Yep.
so for me, ideal customer profile, what's the pain that, as they would articulate it? What's the value you create? What's the buyer's process? And I guess most importantly, what's the trigger? Because I see a lot of consultants trying to sell services that don't really address a very big pain, or if they do address a big pain, they're addressing a pain that is not hurting right now. And I look at it and
Got
go,
it.
look, Jeremy, you've been in corporates as well.
Yeah.
we live with all sorts of problems that we're not trying to actively solve because they're just not that important right now. And so if you're a consultant and you're designing services that address those smaller problems around the outside, it's a really tough thing to try and monetize against. Whereas if you're the guy that solves the problem that everybody is thinking about right now in a given organization, it's a it becomes a walk in the park.
So what I'm hearing is ICP is typically the profile of a customer, and it's clearly
Yes.
important. But when you were talking, what I picked up was it's not necessarily about the customer, it's about the problem that they are experiencing and then speaking that language, but also speaking to the right people. Because as you say, if you speak to a lead engineer who loves what you're talking about, they've got they can't hire you, right? So it's interesting, but it's not of any value. But if you can identify that it's the CEO that is seeing the effects of the problem and speak their language, they're the kind of, they have the buying power, right? They can come to you and say, come on in, Dan, and sort out this problem for me.
Yeah, when I first started doing this, my observation, so, and I'm seeing it again now, it's starting to become more and more prolific. There's one version of the fractional avatar, if you like, that is fractional role within an organization. So fractional CTO, we use that as an example. That best fits organizations that either don't have the demand or the capital to support a full-time CTO. And therefore the
Yeah,
tenure of that role is going to be, a number of months until you've got them to a point where they need a full-time equivalent. The challenge for me is there's less of those types of roles than there are organizations that have the problem that I understand. And so for me, I I woke up and went, actually, I have never had a client that didn't have technology leadership in play. Yeah, I'm a technology leader. If I went down the fractional role within an organization type route, most people that I would speak to would say, actually, we've got a CTO.
we've got one of them already. We don't need you.
And so I changed my focus away from being that job title within the organization to being quite often a supporting party for the existing job title within the organization or an extension of capacity or a different skill set that maybe they didn't yet have. And a lot of that ideal customer profile thinking was actually, is my actual customer the CEO? Or is my customer somebody just like me inside the organization that doesn't have this skill set? Because the narrative changes quite dramatically
Right, of course. Yeah.
and your approach changes because trust me, when you walk into any organization, and I've had chairmen that have introduced me into organizations, and you turn up on day one and you find the clone version of you that isn't quite, doesn't have the full skill set or doesn't have the capacity, there is a natural fear, whether it's spoken or unspoken, there's a natural fear that you're there to get rid of them.
Hmm.
And and so for me, when I know that that's the situation, when I know there's an incumbent technology leader that there's been no conversation to get rid of, it's just a we need this problem solving. I have to work twice as hard to A, convince them that I'm not here as an axeman. B, my sole ambition is to make them the hero of this situation. You know, I don't need the extra credibility boost of saying, "Hey, look at
Right.
all the wonderful things I've done." My goal is to work with them to help them achieve the outcome that they desire, and then to walk away from that situation. And so I only got that logic by really truly modeling my ideal customer profiles at that level. Now, fun fact, over the last 3 years, as I say, I've spoken to well over 1,000 people. The people that are not succeeding or the people that are struggling or the people that are inconsistent in their business outcomes, vast majority of times, 9 times out of 10, it's a weakness in the ideal customer profile. And
Right.
I can pick it up. I hate the fact that I can do it, but I can pick it up inside 2 minutes. And I say to people, just, very, very surreptitiously, I say, who do you work with? And when that list rambles
Right.
and everybody,
Everyone and anyone who'll
yeah,
have me.
you can't, you can't do it. You
Yeah.
genuinely can't. At a very basic level, if I was sat inside a financial services organization selecting a vendor to deliver, let's say, a CRM, I want a vendor that's got experience in financial services because they'll understand the regulation, they'll understand the competition, they'll understand the environment, the the diligence environment that's in play. So if somebody comes in from, I don't know, retail, they could be the best CRM implementer on the planet, but they don't even get noticed because there's no point of relevance there. I can't make the jump to see a relevance there. And that's why you can't, it doesn't matter how good you are, you can't address such a broad spectrum. You don't create relevance.
Right. And coming back to that incumbent,
Mm.
if I put myself in that situation, let's imagine that I'm a CTO for argument's sake, and I know that I've got this burning problem over here, and I don't have the experience or the time or something, and my team, when I look around, don't really. What's your message to me? Because presumably you're going to say, I've got this. Let me run at that. You focus on your other things. I've got this. I'll sort it for you and hand you back a nicely wrapped up, completed solution. I would imagine that CTO would then welcome you in with open arms.
In almost every situation where I've worked alongside an incumbent version of me, when I've actually been able to have the conversation with them, there is an immediate sense of relief.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
The answer that
Double
I,
relief, right? Double relief because you're not here to take my job and you're going to remove a problem.
yes. And a lot of the time, these problems, if you think about technical debt as an example, it's hyper visible to that person. They know they are managing through treacle on a day-to-day basis. They know the risks inside their architecture. They know the stress and the frustration of trying to justify additional budget when it's not going to create additional output.
Yep.
When I offer some form of solution to that, it gets received in a lot of different ways. There's a very personal way, you're going to take some of the pressure off of me. You're going to make my life better. On the other side of the equation, there's a weird progress type outcome where an incumbent CTO will see that actually I'm willing to stand in front of an executive team and demonstrate exactly why this is important, even if they've been trying to do that for the last 18 months and haven't
Right.
succeeded. And
Yep.
so my narrative will be that sometimes you just need outside eyes with credibility to stand up in front of your executive team and say, that thing that he's been saying to you for the last 2 years that you've been dismissing as irrelevant, it's actually the single most important thing that you need to focus on right now
Yeah.
if you
He,
want to
he was
achieve your
right or she was
target.
right.
They were
Yes. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And I've had that on so many occasions where people say to me, this isn't a news story, Dan. So and so has been saying this for months. We didn't buy into it. They go,
Hmm.
well, now you've got two of us saying it. And so your
Hmm.
choice,
Hmm.
if you want to hit this big stretchy target that you've set for yourself and you're already worried about, you probably ought to deal with this. And it's not,
Hmm.
in my instance, it was never as invasive or as intrusive as people thought it was, which made life a lot easier.